Coming up, the uncertain future of America, Pakistan, and Afghanistan.
If the Americans are serious about reducing the conflict, reducing the threat from the Taliban, it will not be done through military means. It will only be done through dialogue with the Taliban.
Journalist Ahmed Rashid speaks about the state of the Taliban and the troubling economic and political crises in Pakistan. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
I first met Ahmed about 12 years ago when he spoke to us about the Taliban. I knew then that he had something special, as the way in which he introduced us to this brutal regime was an eye-opener, and it was compelling. Since that time, his stature as a journalist has only grown, which I believe can be attributed to his uncanny ability to report on the story of the moment with nuances that not only reflect the rocky political landscape, but warn us of impending trends. Following the publication of his New York Times best-selling book, The Taliban, he wrote Descent into Chaos, which is considered one of the standard reference books on the region's history in the years after 9/11. Pakistan on the Brink is his latest work, which he has said effectively concludes this trilogy.
The main thrust of my argument on Afghanistan in this book is simply that we have to end this war before you leave. If the Americans are serious about reducing the conflict, reducing the threat from the Taliban, it will not be done through military means. It will only be done through dialogue with the Taliban. And the quicker the military realizes that there is no victory in Afghanistan, there is no success, you can kill 10,000, 20,000 Taliban, only more will come. Pakistan has 40 million Pashtuns who make up of the same ethnic group that the Taliban do, and many of them are already fighting in Afghanistan. And it's an endless supply of militancy. So there's absolutely no military solution. And unless the president and senior Secretary Clinton and senior staff get serious behind these talks, I think we're going to be faced with a real crisis come 2014. That crisis will be that there will still be this ongoing civil war, which the moment the American withdrawal starts will intensify. The ethnic divisions in Afghanistan have increased enormously in the last few years. Much of this has revolved around talking to the Taliban. The Pashtuns in Afghanistan are more or less in favor of Karzai's decision to talk to the Taliban. The non-Pashtuns, those who inhabit northern and western Afghanistan, are vehemently against. They spent the whole 90s, if you remember, fighting against the Taliban. And they're not going to accept any kind of deal now, or power-sharing deal, which I'll discuss later, with the Taliban. So ethnic divisions have grown. Ethnic divisions have grown for all sorts of reasons. For example, the Americans have spent 10 times as much money in the south, in the Pashtun areas, to subdue the south and to win hearts and minds rather than in the north. And there's enormous resentment at that. Secondly, the ethnic groups in the north are heavily influenced by neighboring countries, India, Iran, Russia, and there's a danger that interference from these countries through their northern allies could again disrupt the apple cart. We still, in Afghanistan, do not have an indigenous economy which is equivalent to the economy that Afghanistan had in 1978. Now, can you imagine? 600 billion has been spent, right? And we are talking about a primitive economy in 1978, which was essentially, there was 3% of the population had electricity in 1978. Of course, that's better now. But there was food self-sufficiency, which is not the case now. There was an exportable surplus of food and cottage industry, which was quite famous, if you remember your hippie days, Afghan rugs and jackets and all the kind of stuff. There were exportable surpluses, and today we do not have a country that is self-sufficient in food. There is very little exportable agriculture, unfortunately. Afghanistan is a rural country, and the major investment right from the beginning should have been in agriculture. And the industries associated with agriculture, like canning and freezing and all the rest of it. And frankly, none of that has happened. Nobody was asking the Americans to put up a computer chip factory in Kabul. But, basic investment in basic things that the Afghans could do, which would be create a number of jobs. Again, agriculture creates hundreds of thousands of jobs. Because it's, agriculture in Afghanistan is quite primitive. Now, the last major issue is Pakistan. Pakistan houses the entire Taliban leadership and has done for the last 12 years. It has supported the Taliban. It helped launch the Taliban in Afghanistan. the military and the ISI worked closely with the Taliban since 2003. And factions within the Afghan Taliban have been either more or less loyal to work closely with the intelligence services of Pakistan. Now, in the last couple of years, Pakistan has clearly stated that it wants a peaceful resolution to Afghanistan. It wants talks between the Taliban and Karzai, and between the Taliban and the Americans. But the key issue, again, is this constant, rhetoric, but absolutely no delivery on the ground. What the Afghans need and what the Americans need is access to these Taliban who are in Pakistan. And that access is still not being made available. And to me, that's the most critical component of Pakistan's lack of strategic thinking, if you like. In 2003, when the Taliban, retreated from Afghanistan and they were housed in Pakistan, there was a certain logic to what Pakistan was doing. The logic was simply that, there's this Northern Alliance government in Kabul, which is anti-Pakistan. India has arrived in Kabul. There was enormous suspicion of India's role in Afghanistan. And the idea was that hopefully at some stage, the military would be using the Taliban as a lever to persuade the Americans and the Karzai government to take back these Taliban and to, reconcile with your enemy, etc., so that Afghanistan could follow a peaceful path. Now, I think what happened in 2003 was simply the Iraq War, the belief that the Americans might leave Afghanistan now because they started this war in Iraq. And so instead of offering the Taliban as a kind of peace-building measure, the Taliban decided to go in for an insurgency. Let me just, briefly talk about Pakistan. Pakistan is in very deep crisis, and I consider it far more serious an occurrence than what is even happening in Afghanistan. What happens in Afghanistan stays in Afghanistan in that sense. It doesn't really impinge on the whole region. And Pakistan, unfortunately, whatever happens in Pakistan has an immediate impact. In the West, we are the hub of terrorism, and all these terrorist groups who are operating in Europe and the United States even. Pakistan is still the main training base for that. Whatever happens in Pakistan affects relations with India and stability on the subcontinent. It affects Afghanistan, it affects China, and it affects the Middle East. So stability in Pakistan and growth and development is critical. What I really say is I think the benchmark of the present failure is actually the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War was highly significant for third world countries who were either allied with one side or the other, because for the first time they had to break off their dependency on one or the other superpower and stand up on their own feet. And that meant several things. You had to reform your economy. You weren't going to receive any more handouts from the Americans or the Soviets. You had to build regional alliances like ASEAN or the EU, and you had to have good neighborly ties to enable trade and prosperity, etc., to grow. Pakistan does just the opposite. First of all, the whole Cold War, whatever the benefits were or the strategic thinking that should have taken place, never happens. The military runs foreign policy, and the military at that time, throughout the 90s, the very period when the whole Clinton message world was making all these dramatic changes, the military was fighting two wars, two covert wars. One war was being fought in Kashmir through Pakistani militants who were fighting the Indians in Kashmir, and the other war was supporting the Taliban. And we had hundreds of army personnel inside Afghanistan in the 90s fighting with the Taliban against the Northern Alliance, who were being backed by Iran and India. So in the 90s, at this precise moment, there were two covert wars being waged. And obviously there's absolutely no space or time or energy to be given to thinking strategically about how we should develop economically. The military effectively takes about a quarter to a third of the budget. And after you do debt servicing and returning your loans, there's very little left for the social services. You have a situation now where economic growth is around 2%. India's economic growth is about 7 or 8%. And the economic crisis in Pakistan is now absolutely telling. There is no gas, there is no electricity. I have not had gas in Lahore for 6 months in my house. The whole city of 12 million people. Electricity is off 18 hours a day. not on, off, 18 hours a day. Industry has collapsed. Industry is moving out of the country rapidly to Dubai, to Singapore, to Malaysia, all over. There is the whole growth of the Pakistani Taliban and extremist groups who are threatening civil society. The army has been fighting them, but it seems that they continue to grow and expand. There have not recently been major bomb blasts in cities outside the northwest, but in the northwest, where the Pakistani Taliban are most active, they have expanded, without a doubt. And the real problem now is that many of the militant groups in other parts of Pakistan have joined up with them. So for the first time, we have a prospect of a real nationwide, if you like, extremist terrorist movement. I won't call it a political movement, but a terrorist movement. Then you have the breakdown of relations with the US over a period of about a year. There's enormous anti-American hostility in Pakistan, in the army in particular. For the first time, I think the high command of the army is very worried by the mood lower down in the army, which is both Islamist and anti-American. And many of the measures being taken by General Kiani, the army chief, are a result of pressure from below rather than kind of strategic thinking which he's doing himself. The whole problem now in Afghanistan is that if there's an anti-American wave in Pakistan, there's equally an anti-Pakistan wave in Washington. The military is totally fed up. The US military is essentially saying, we'll humor Pakistan till 2014, but after that, it's over. Which would be a very dangerous proposition for Pakistan, because clearly then the tilt would be almost decisively in favor of India. And that could only increase tensions in Pakistan and anti-Americanism in Pakistan. So we have to get this relationship back on an even keel. But it's not going to get back on an even keel unless the military turns the state of ship around. For 30 years, we have supported extremists as an arm of our foreign policy. Now, where I say, why the Cold War was that after the Cold War, that should have been impossible. That should not have been the main thrust of foreign policy, but it remains so. And then we get 9/11, and surely after 9/11, you cannot support extremism as a means to conduct foreign policy, whether it's with India or whether it's with Afghanistan and the Taliban. And yet we continue to do so. And good friends, close friends, China, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, who we owe a great deal to, tell us exactly this, that stop doing this. It doesn't work. And the military just seems incapable or unwilling to be able to turn the ship of state around and to get back at a new level. So the tragedy is that as long as we continue to maintain extremist groups willing to fight in Kashmir, we do make no attempt at reconciling them with society, bringing them in, educating them, providing them with new skills, etc., which has been done in several of the Gulf countries in their battle with al-Qaeda. Unless we are prepared to do that, unfortunately, I find that this is the main strategic conundrum that Pakistan faces. You cannot have a foreign policy based on supporting extremism, whether at home or whether abroad. And clearly, right now, the Americans are feeling it in Afghanistan and elsewhere, but it remains an immense danger for Pakistan. Who is going to invest in Pakistan under these conditions? How can you develop education and the social services in Pakistan under these conditions? When the fundamentalists take over schools, they take over mosques and turn them then into, bastions of hate and extremism. So we have a huge problem to combat. I still believe that it is possible. I think there's enormous goodwill in Pakistan. There's a very strong youth movement. Remember, 60% of the population is under 25. The youth really want change. They're fed up with the existing political parties. They're fed up with the military domination over foreign policy. They really want change, and they are, coming out and taking part in politics for the first time in a generation, basically. And they have expressed their anger at the existing political parties. And finally, they've been, very active in all sorts of new developments, which is taking Pakistani society forward, whether it's music or art or writing or whatever. So I think the youth movement is a very positive factor, but the only problem at the moment is that there's no leadership for this youth movement. I can just hope it emerges. But ultimately what is going to determine the country's future is going to be the lack of money and the lack of cash and the lack of an economy. Because even the military have to pay their soldiers salaries. And if those salaries are not going to be made available, I think we will be forced to turn around. The economic reforms that every other country carried out in the 90s, including the former Soviet Union, we have failed to carry out. There has been no land reform, there's been no tax reform. 1% of Pakistanis pay income tax. So the elite refuses to, even pay for itself. So all these, this whole situation has to turn around. Thank you very much indeed.
I have a question here from the webcast. So I would like to ask Ahmed Rashid whether, given the historical feudal nature of Pakistan's social organization, there is any immediate hope for democracy.
Yes, I think democracy is the future. Really, I think the ability for people to change their government is still the clarion call for many Pakistanis. The fact is that we have never had a government that has been, changed through the vote. Always civilian governments that were elected have never fulfilled their term in office. They've been either ousted or there's been a military coup. We need election after election. I mean, yes, this government is considered corrupt, inept, incompetent, but we can hope that the next government will be slightly better and the government after that will be slightly better. But this is a process that has to be allowed to continue. And the military has to be convinced that this process is allowed to continue. And I think this is the only answer, frankly. This will bring in new politicians, it will bring in the youth, it will bring in a whole range of new factors. One thing people always say, well, why have you got these dynasties and the Bhuttos and the Sharifs and the... I say, look, the military comes into power for 10 years. We've had 4 blocks of military rule. They exile everyone. They throw everybody else into jail. There are no politics at all in the country. They are ruthless in their ruling and how they rule. How do you expect young people to join politics at such a time? I mean, for 10 years under Musharraf, nobody joined politics because the leaders were in exile abroad, other people were in jail. The last thing a young person would want to do would be to join a political party. There was just no future in it. Now, and the military has been the cause of this. And how, so we have to break this logjam and be able to move forward and encourage a new generation of people to come into politics and to come into what, many of you understand as service. I mean, politics is not just politics, it's service to the people and to the nation. That concept is totally missing in Pakistan. What politics means is that you serve yourself. You are corrupt, you make money. The amount you spent on your election campaign, you have to recoup that through, various corrupt practices. Now, that kind of thinking has to end. And that's only going to happen when you get a new generation of people in politics.
Thank you very much. I'm Nawaf Salam, the ambassador of Lebanon. Regarding the relationship with the Taliban, I see your point of view and the larger rationale for engaging with the Taliban. But as seen from the Taliban's point of view, could you elaborate, please, on why the Taliban, in view of their ideology, I mean, would they be interested in a compromise? Would they be capable for compromising? And what would be the terms of such a compromise with the Taliban? Thank you.
I think the Taliban, they want to compromise. And I'll just list you. First of all, they have suffered enormous casualties, and they are very tired. Many of them have been fighting for 30 years, if not the last 12 years, against the Americans. Thirdly, they are fed up with being micromanaged and manipulated by Pakistan. Their first accusation when they talk to the Americans, they talk to the Germans or Qatar, is the fact that the Pakistanis have jailed them, they've run them. They consider themselves Afghan. They want to be known as Afghan. They don't want to be known as stooges of Pakistan. They want to go back home. But most importantly, are 2-3 other points. The first is that the Taliban do not want to plunge Afghanistan into a civil war after 2014, into a worse civil war. In other words, the Taliban don't want to start a process of conquest, as they did in 1993, and then be confronted by the non-Pashtuns in the north, and then that will prompt an almighty civil war in which all the neighboring states will come in and arm one side or the other. In other words, a repeat of the civil war of the 90s. The Taliban don't want that. And they know that this time they couldn't win like they did last time, because the north is much more developed, more powerful now than it was before. So it would be an endless civil war that you would be talking about. I think the third thing is that the Taliban know that if they tried to seize power just in Kabul, they would immediately lose all Western support. All the money would go. You know, whatever pledges had been made, nobody would back a Taliban seizure of power in Kabul. Which means that in 6 months, the Taliban would lose the support of the Afghan population. And they're deeply aware of that. I mean, they haven't fought 12 years just to, lose their support base because they are not able to feed them, their support base. And if you remember again, that's what happened in 2000, 1 year before 9/11. Actually, all the UN agencies had left, the NGOs had left, the Afghanistan was starving. And millions of refugees started fleeing out of Afghanistan even before 9/11 because of problems of starving and starvation and all the rest of it. So the Taliban don't want to be responsible for a civil war. The Taliban don't want to be responsible for state collapse, which would happen if the West walked away. So much better for the Taliban is to go into partnership with someone like Karzai or whoever the government is, and be able to share power with them so that the money would keep coming. And the West would have a government and a face to which it would still remain committed. Now the question, the other part of this whole equation, of course, is the really sensitive issue that you asked, which is, what do we do about the Constitution, education, women's rights, all these issues? Now, yeah, the Taliban are still demanding Sharia. They're saying this Constitution is a liberal, secular, Western, etc. Look, they've been sitting in Pakistan in safe houses. They have no idea at this new generation of Afghans that have come up in the last 10, 12 years. Educated, working, women included, people, with their rights and want to keep their rights. And I think, that the negotiating process would involve also an exposure process, where the Taliban would be meeting delegations of Afghan students, Afghan women, Afghan educators, Afghan doctors, etc., and be educated about what changes had happened in Afghanistan. And I think we've seen some of that. The Taliban, in many areas, are allowing girls education. Certainly, they have stopped burning all girls' schools for the last year and a half. Now, I'm not saying that's a huge development, but I mean, in the Afghan context, it is. I mean, and more could happen if the Taliban would get exposure. I would like to see women's delegations actually meet with the Taliban and tell the Taliban what they think. I think the Taliban are changing. I think they are fed up with their present situation. And ultimately, they're Afghans. They are not, even the jihadist ideology has been turned now, if you see their website, been turned now much more into a kind of nationalist, we are Afghans kind of appeal, rather than appealing for jihad.
Do you think the youth might come to the fore in terms of an Arab Spring type of event in Pakistan, or would the military simply crush that? What are the parallels and what are the differences between Egypt and Pakistan in that context?
Well, two very big differences with Egypt. One is, of course, that dictatorship in Egypt crushed Islamic fundamentalism. It crushed democracy also, but the Muslim Brotherhood and these groups were never allowed to function either as official political parties or even as an underground. I mean, they were underground, but they were constantly being harassed and torn. In Pakistan, you had state sponsorship of extremism by successive military regimes. So there was a huge difference. Whether that state sponsorship extended into fighting in Kashmir or in Afghanistan. That is a very big difference. I think the other thing is that under dictatorship in the Middle East, there was a tolerance and respect for minorities. In Pakistan, unfortunately, again, there has been state sponsorship of sectarian groups who have hurt and really damaged the multi-faith process in Pakistan. So, for example, today, Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, and within the Muslim fold, Shias, Ahmadis, Ismailis are all being targeted by Sunni extremists. And the state is doing nothing to stop it, or very little to stop it. The idea of an Arab Spring in Pakistan worries a lot of people, because there is a natural leadership for that Arab Spring. And it is not the liberal, pro-democracy, secular youth. It is the fundamentalists. So a movement against the elite right now, against the ruling elite, be it a movement against the military, against the present government, against the entire power structure, if there was a movement, the leadership of that would fall into the hands of the fundamentalists, because they are organized, they have guns, and they have they are, even though they don't have widespread support, they're able to bring people out, tens of thousands of people out into the streets, as compared to the other side.
Thank you once again for a wonderful talk. We now know so much more about Pakistan and Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.